your screen?
Present is down in the bottom.
You're good to go.
So I've got to get my cursor down there, don't I?
Yes, it's down in the bottom right. It says present now.
Yeah. I'm having some issues with my cursor. Hang on. There we go. All right, I see it. Okay, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started and convene our second meeting of the calendar committee. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. We do have a couple of members who were unable to be present with us last time. I'm just going to have them introduce yourself. So when I say your name, if you don't mind, just introduce yourself, who you are and who you represent, maybe the school that you work at, and or if you have any children in the district where they go to school. So just kind of so we know who you're representing. So Laverne, if you don't mind, if you could just introduce yourself.
I'm Laverne Carter. I'm secretary, excuse me, at Safe Harbor Academy. I have a granddaughter who I'm raising, and she's in the second grade at Southside.
Awesome. Glad you could be here with us today.
Thank you.
And Sierra.
Hello.
Hello.
Sierra Spalding, the fourth grade. Formerly Huntertown. Hi, Miss Kaiser.
Gotcha. I think your audio went in and out just a little bit, Sierra, but I think you said you have a child at Simmons, correct?
I do. Is that better? I have my heater on. I don't know.
Yes, that is better.
Okay,
Yes.
awesome. Yeah, I have a fourth grader at Simmons.
Awesome. I'm glad.
Hi, Sierra. I miss you.
I miss you too.
Well, two other housekeeping items. One, the board has their planning meeting Monday, so if we can wrap up our work today, that would be helpful. That way the board could look at our proposals and then vote on it the following week. Now, if we don't today, that's fine. I mean, if it takes longer than today, that's okay. But if we can wrap it up today, that would be helpful for the board to have that information Monday night to be able to make their decisions. And then the last housekeeping item, I can't remember if I mentioned this or not last time, but the statute, the calendar statute does require that we give the board options. So we can't just present one calendar. We have to present multiple calendars from which to choose. And so kind of what we've done in the past, we'll present our recommended calendar, and then we'll also provide another calendar that maybe there's something different in it. And so we can talk about it more later, but maybe my initial thought is maybe that winter break where it stops on a Friday, and it seemed like that was the consensus last week, but that might be one area that we say, hey, this is another option if you want to consider, but that's something we'll talk about when we get there. So, well, I'm going to share my screen and pull up the agenda. Are y'all seeing my screen? No, not yet. Hang on.
You have to click on the box, right?
Click on the box.
I think so.
There we
Yeah,
go.
you go. And hit share.
Gotcha.
There you go.
All right, there we go. So here's our agenda for tonight. I'd like to kind of go over, I know I sent you all in an email the results at the time, but I want to kind of revisit the results so everyone can see those. Then we'll kind of get into our discussion about our calendar for next year, our recommendations, and then we'll adjourn. So we'll start off with this is the employee survey. You can see the number of responses that we had. This question was on if we had the traditional calendar. Pretty overwhelming support for a full week fall break should we have a traditional calendar like we've had in the past. If we do a variable calendar like this year, it's not quite as overwhelming. It's a little more dispersed, although the majority, over half out of the four options, over half would like to see the full week. So that's the traditional and the variable calendar results on fall break. These are our parent survey results. Still, the vast majority of parents seem to be in favor of the full week on a regular calendar. A little more closely distributed for the variable, but still a little more for keeping the full week. But it is a much more closer distribution among our parents. Also sent the parent survey out in Spanish language. These are our Spanish language responses. You can see the number of responses that we had. We'll go on to our students. I don't know that anyone's shocked by our student responses. They had the highest percentage of students that wanted the full week. You can see the number of responses, and just so you know, I surveyed students. I sent this out to students in grades 6 through 11. I did not survey our seniors who would not be here next year, but I did survey our middle school students and our freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. So there's those results. And I also sent that survey in Spanish language, received 4 responses. Oh, I forgot to mention on the parent survey, I did have a couple of parents emailed me. They did not do the online survey, but I had 2 parents emailed me. One was for a full week either way, and the other parent was for a full week on a regular calendar and a shortened week on a variable calendar. So, I'm going to stop sharing now. And again, you had a lot of those results already to look at, so just open it up for any discussion, any feedback, any thoughts on our surveys. It seems to me the majority of people want a full week. The overwhelming majority want a full week on a regular calendar, and still the majority want, not as much, but the majority still want the full week on the variable calendar. Is that what you all are gathering as well? Okay.
Yes, and I would say that even though it's not as large and overwhelming on the variable, when you take into the account the folks that were indifferent, then it wouldn't matter to them either way. So I would tend to put them in the category of the full week.
Okay.
That would be my thought.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I do think it's important to, I know that students can't, run the entire system, but I do think it's very, very important that their voice really be heard, because they are the ones going to school every day. They are the ones with the assignments, and they know, mental health wise, when they kind of need these breaks, or just, family time or study time or college visit time or whatever it is folks are doing. I feel like the students are probably the experts and should have, a large amount of sway in our decision making. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah. Ms. Pitchford, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank
Okay,
you.
awesome. We just, our members who were unable to be with us last week, I've just had them introduce themselves. So if you don't mind, if you can just tell us who you are and kind of who you represent, like what schools, if you have children that go to our schools.
Certainly. My name's Elizabeth Pitchford. I work over at Ruggles Sign, And my daughter attends Woodford County High School. She's a freshman this year.
Awesome. Well, so we just, Ms. Pitchford, we just got done looking at the fall break survey results. I'd sent those out to you last week. There hasn't been much change at all since what I sent you, but just wanted you to have that. That's the only thing we've talked about so far. So.
Great, and I love the results. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Well, based on those, I'm going to bring up. So this was. I'm going to need to share my screen again. Hang on. All right, so what I'm bringing up is, this is the template, kind of our starting point from last week. I think, and you tell me if I'm wrong, I think from our discussion last week, we felt like, at least for next year, the way things fell with the template moving forward, I don't think we had many, if any, suggested changes. Based on the fall break results, it would still be a week. I did survey other districts. I think I sent that to you guys. That most of the districts that surround us are planning on fall break this week. There were two, I think it was Anderson and Mercer, that were looking at it at this week, but most of them were this week. I think based on the discussion last week, we liked ending on a Friday and coming back on a Monday in December, so ending on the 17th and coming back on the 3rd. And then that puts us out, barring any changes, it puts us out on May 24th. So, just going to kind of open that up for discussion. What do you all think about this calendar as a starting point? Do we need to, are there changes that anyone would like to propose? Anything that we need to discuss? Or does this need to be the calendar we recommend?
I would suggest it be at least the first choice that we recommend. Our suggestion, but I know we have to do two options.
So this, go ahead.
I would concur with Elaine. I like this. I would recommend also that this be our first option to recommend to the board.
I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody. Any other thoughts? Any other feedback on if we take the calendar that was presented last week and based on the survey results, is this the one that we want to make our recommended calendar? Does anyone have any concerns with that?
No, but Jill cannot talk. Her connection is spotty, so she put in the chat that she's in favor of the results of the fall break survey and also adopting this calendar as a draft.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, I think it rolled over really well this time. I like not starting on single digits. I like ending before the holiday. Bryant, do you have any other suggestions? I know as a student, you probably think about the calendar a little bit more than maybe I do as a parent or a board member. Is there anything else you can think of? I thought your input last time was very helpful.
Looking at what we have right now, I think it's pretty good. As we saw with the surveys, the student body is very much in favor of fall break, and so I think just keeping fall break the same way as years previous is good thing to stick with.
okay.
I do have a question that I was kind of wondering.
Sure.
As I was watching last week's, I know in previous years there's been some days where, and it wasn't necessarily, I know you guys kind of talked about the 2nd and 3rd of January. I know nobody likes to start on the 2nd, but I know there's been some years where like we've come in on a Tuesday versus starting on a Monday. Is that like is there some rationale behind that besides the dates that maybe? And I'm just asking, just kind of out of
Sure.
curiosity.
Now, it often just depends. Like we always take the current calendar, just roll it forward and see where things fall. And like next year, when we meet next year and look at the 22-23 school year, I believe that Friday in December will be the 16th. That's probably too early. Like getting out on the 17th is about as early as we can do it and have it make sense. Because if we get out on the 16th, that has us coming back on January the 2nd, the day after New Year's Day, and that's probably not good. So it really is looking at where the holidays fall. Do we have enough time in the next week? So now this is a year where it's you could really go either way. You could end on that Friday, or you could go a couple days in the next week and still be okay, because it's not backing up right against Christmas. But the rationale is just it's different every year, and it's usually based on how the holidays fall and what the date of that Friday is. So,
Gotcha.
yep.
Thank you. I was just wondering that.
Yep. Because you're right. Some days we do. We go Monday and Tuesday of the next week, and we come back on a Wednesday in January. Like sometimes it falls that way, and sometimes it doesn't.
I know for us, we enjoy those shorter weeks, getting back into the flow of things. It's like, oh, just 3 days or just 4 days instead of doing the 5.
There's a definite benefit to doing the short weeks in that regards, absolutely. Well, so is everyone okay with me presenting the calendar I presented last week as our first option? Okay. Well, let's talk about, as I said, we do have to give options. So something about, we have to give another calendar at least where something is different. So I mentioned earlier, is that what we want to make different? Do we want to give that to the board and say, this is our recommendation that we end on Friday, but an alternate to that would be going Monday and Tuesday the next week and coming back on a Wednesday. That seems like a fairly clean, not too disruptive kind of option. But I'm certainly open to other suggestions. We could look at the start date, we could look at fall break, we could look at other things. But we do have to give the board at least one other calendar from which to look at.
I would suggest that, or moving fall break, and the only reason would be is that I know that we have some employees that have family members that also work in Anderson. I know we're not going to be able to make everybody happy, but we have some family members that work in Anderson County, and so it could be problematic. But we also share a lot of students who have the other parent lives in Anderson County, so that might be an option, but it does sound like that the majority of the districts you surveyed had our fall break. So I'm fine with either way, but there would be reason for us to move our fall break.
Sure. And we not a large number, we do have a handful of employees that live in Mercer County as well. So that could be our alternate calendar, would be the same calendar I presented, except for moving fall break a week later.
And can you restate, Garrett,
Sure.
about coming back 2 days later? You were speaking about just before this January.
Yeah, so the calendar that we just talked about being our first recommendation, winter break, well, the last day before winter break for students would be Friday, December the 17th. And we would then be coming back on Monday, January 3rd. Another option would be to go, instead of ending on that Friday the 17th, would be to go to school Monday and Tuesday of the following week, the 20th and the 21st. And still doing a full 2 weeks out, but that would have us coming back on the 5th of January, would be a Wednesday. So that's what those 2 days would do. We would go 2 extra days in the first semester, and then come back 2 days later than we have in the proposed calendar in the second semester.
Okay, with that said, I'm thinking I like the fall break switch better.
Yeah, if we as a group like getting done on a Friday, then maybe the fall break's the option that we present to the board.
I think that's a good idea to take the less risky one, because I think people would be very, very, very upset if instead of having that full weekends around Christmas, if we kind of tinkered with that. And while I don't think the board would choose that, I don't know that you want to put it out there as an option either. I kind of like the safe play that the ladies have discussed. But
Yeah.
As a teacher, it's really hard to get anything done for 2 days. You know, like by that point, it's Santa Claus and nothing else. Well, but I teach little ones, but I mean, it's big ones too. It's Santa Claus or nothing else.
So I think Ms. Brown had a comment. So not to throw a wrench in things, but could the variable instruction calendar be our second option that we present to the board? It could. I think the intent of the variable calendar was to kind of have that as a backup. And I think we want to plan for, at least in my thoughts, are plan for a regular school year, and then have the variable as a backup. That's my thoughts, but we could do that. I mean, that could be the second option. But even if it was a second option, I'd still want the board to bless it, for lack of a better term. You know, that would be the calendar that we would go with, should we still be in the throes of COVID, because we just don't know. We don't know what next year is going to hold. So we could do that. Any other thoughts?
Being that I think I heard you all mention something about the benefits of us now having the
You froze up on us, Sierra.
Could we potentially play around with the start date of the year for the second count, for the second option? I mean, obviously, you know, we want our first one, but, you know, I don't know if I remember hearing anything about why the start date was. I know you said you rolled it over, so I don't know if that's something we also did.
We can. The start date, we started on the second Thursday in August. I mean, for years. Actually, it was the second Wednesday for probably, a decade or longer. It was the second Wednesday. And then we switched to the second Thursday, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago. So it's pretty consistent that we've had that second week start date. Now, sometimes that's as late as like the 14th or 15th. Sometimes that can get down into single digits and be as early as the 8th. But yeah, we can look at that if we want to. Just if we make adjustments to the start date, though, then we have to make adjustments somewhere else down the line. So you're either going to have to reduce fall break, which it doesn't seem like people want, or it's going to put us probably past Memorial Day, which I don't think most people want either. So that's the issue with the start date, is whatever we do at the beginning of the calendar, we've got to make up those days, that time somewhere else. I kind of like the fall break idea. I think, Derby, did you say that? Was that yours?
That was yes.
It's hers. It seemed to be the least. To me, it seems to be the least disruptive, and it gives the board. It gives the board two good choices, I think. You know, regardless of which choice they would make, it's still basically the same calendar. The only difference is when we would have that week. It would just be a week later. Other than that, there's really no drastic changes that the board would have to kind of think through. So.
say we go with that one then, as our second.
Okay. Are we okay with the committee as doing that, going with our option number 2 that we'll give the board would be moving fall break to that next week? Okay. All right. Super. Well, let's talk. I'm going to share my screen one more time. I'm not as proficient as I was last week on the screen sharing. Too much turkey, I guess. Okay. So for the members who weren't here last week, I kind of already went over it a little bit today, but you know, usually we just give the board some calendar options and that's it. Because there's so many unknowns for next year, I felt like it might be a good idea. You know, this year we were kind of scrambling and we presented a new calendar to the board kind of right before school started. And what if we go ahead and already have an alternate calendar planned? And we can go ahead and communicate that. Like this, the calendar that the board approves, that's what we plan on doing. But if the need arises and we need to have kind of a different kind of year and start later, then this is the calendar we will use. So this is kind of a backup calendar that we could go ahead and communicate out to parents, to employees, to students, just so they'll know, like, if we have to make a change again, this is what it will be, rather than doing it so close to the school year. So it is very, very similar to our current school year. It's a later August start date. It's 166 days of instruction, I believe. It takes all of the early release days from the fall and moves them to the spring. And then the spring looks very similar to what it would look at in our recommended calendar, other than the early release days that are moved to the spring. And we would still end on the same day.
Garrett, I have a question.
Yes.
And I know that this is our variable instruction calendar, and I know that this is from the boat dock bill, because it takes into account our instructional hours that we can use. Is there a reason, and this may be what some parents are also asking, and this might be what Sierra was, Ms. Spalding was wondering as well, how is it that we can start later with the instructional hours with this and still end on the same date? Is this something that the board might ask why we couldn't do in the future?
Yeah, hang on. Let me stop sharing my screen. I'll answer that. Or have I already stopped sharing? Can you all see me? Did I stop sharing my screen?
You did.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, there was a push a few years ago from the legislature to mandate a later start date. And there's some pushback from school districts saying, hey, like, we don't want the legislature telling us when to start school. We want to, as a community, to make that decision for ourselves and not have that legislated for us. So, rather than mandate a later start date, the legislature passed an incentive for districts to start later. And the incentive is if you start, I think the Monday closest to August 26th or something like that, then you as a district, as a school district, are not bound by the number of days that you typically are. So usually we have to go to school, all school districts in Kentucky have to go to school a minimum of 170 days. You also have to go to school a minimum of 1,062 hours. What that bill did was waive the day requirement. So if you start late enough, then you don't have to go the 170 days. You still have to meet the hour requirement. That is not waived. But you can meet the hour requirement in basically any number of days. So as long as you meet the hours, you're good. So that's why it's we would start to the Monday or the closest to whatever that date is. And then we wouldn't be bound by the hours. That's why we can go less days. But you have to start late enough to be able to do that. Like you can't just start a week later. If you start just a week later, then you still have to meet all the requirements. But if you start late enough, then you're not bound by the days. If that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I do think it's important that, you know, you share that information, and that we as people on the committee are able to share that with parents. And then also just really to frame it is it's really not a reward for your students to get less of an education. I mean, that's really not a reward for anyone in any way, shape, or form. And the other thing is it would really affect, you know, teachers' schedules and salaries and days worked and those kinds of things. So, but I do think that's really important, Derby, that we make, or Ms. Akers, that we make sure that we say to folks, you know, we understand that this is starting a little bit later on this alternative calendar, but this is not an ideal calendar. This is if we have a pandemic crisis calendar, the best kind of we can do and still meet all the legislative requirements. So I think that's a really good.
I agree. I do think we're a district that values instructional days. Historically, we go 175 school days. It's always 175. So we usually do 5 days more than the minimum. Some districts just do the minimum. That's okay, but I do feel like we have valued those instructional days, you know, throughout the years, and so I would agree with that.
Well, and even this year, when we did start late, we were still on, the staff was still under contract. We still worked when we came back early August. So if you didn't change our contracts, we would still be coming into work. And then if you did change our contracts, that would be a whole different situation.
Yeah.
So I think that is in those discussions, if that were to come up in a board discussion, Ms. Springate, those would be, while it looks cool, maybe like, ooh, we could start later, I know the original intent was particularly in those high tourism areas, and not that Woodford County doesn't have tourism, but I understand the intent of it, and you're right, Mr. Wells, that it was very much needed in the time that we had this year, and it might be needed, I hope not,
Right.
next year.
Yeah, the variable calendar, it doesn't give you any flexibility. Like we meet our hour requirement on the last day of school. So if we did have to be out and it couldn't be an NTI day, I mean, we're adding time at the end, and we've done that before. But you know, being able to go a full year, a regular school year, gives you a lot more flexibility. Should you have, you know, an ice storm or something like that, where you can kind of absorb that better than you could on a variable calendar. But yeah, to answer your question, that's why it is the way it is. That's a little bit of history, a lot more than you probably wanted to know about the calendar bill, but that's why it is the way it is.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure. Any other statutes you'd like me to educate you on? Okay, good. That's the only one I know, to be honest with you. All right, the variable instruction calendar. My thoughts are to, you know, the one I just had up there. Like if our recommended calendar is what we talked about, if our option 1, then I think the one I showed, you know, that it basically keeps most everything the same. I know we had some discussion about maybe taking fall break and moving it somewhere else on the variable calendar, and I get that logic. My concern is, though, families are going to plan for the week that we put in the regular calendar. Like, that's when they're going to schedule their vacations. As I told you last week, I've already gotten calls, when is it? We've got to put our vacation days in. So that's the week, whatever week we put in the regular calendar, that's the week they're going to plan for. So if we go with a variable instructional calendar, if we have to, I think it probably needs to be the same week, because that's what people are going to plan on. That's what they're going to expect. So that's my thoughts on the variable calendar.
Are we gonna give 2 options for this then? So if, let's say the board decides that they want our October 11th fall break option, like like, can we specify, and I guess, you know, Sherry, you can do that, like, we'll specify, then we also want to move fall break to that same.
Yeah, I think what I'm gonna have to present 4 calendars, our recommended calendar, our option, our alternate calendar, and then as an aside, whatever calendar they pick, they need to pick, you know, bless whatever variable calendar where the fall breaks correspond. So, I mean, I'm really just presenting 2 calendars for consideration, but then I'm also going to present these 2 just to kind of like, I don't think it's, I guess I'm not exactly sure how to answer. That's a good question. I don't know if they're really approving 1 calendar, but then they're also giving their blessing to the variable calendar should we need it, so we can go ahead and communicate that out. If things go south, if things don't get better, this is what we will go with. Because the board would have to come back and approve a variable calendar at a later date should they decide to go that direction. But at least we've already communicated out what that would be.
So then they won't be voting, they'll only vote on our instructional calendar. So the variable calendar really just kind of becomes a conversation
Yeah,
piece.
it's more of a
initially.
for your information. Yes. Yeah, they're only approving 1 calendar.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say just, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just that they'll have that, unlike last year where we were in, July, early August, like, what do we do? Where they'll have this and be like, as we see things, I don't even know if you would know in May, but like, oh, we've got this, we can go ahead and say, look guys, this looks like what it's gonna be. Instead of, the board will already have it and can be, and again, it's not gonna be all these, I mean, there are unknowns, but it's not gonna be as unknown. Again, there are lots of, it's just a lot of what ifs, but this will be one less what if.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely love the idea, Mr. Wells, of us doing this now, because we don't have to come back together as a calendar committee later and try to make up, in hindsight kind of stuff. And I do think that it's just really important that parents, that students, that staff, that everyone is aware that if we have to go with an alternative calendar, this will be the one. And it just makes sense to kind of roll things over. So I love Ms. Spalding's example of, well, make sure we do 2 alternative calendars so that we can coincide with both fall breaks, because we want it to roll over kind of exactly and make sense. So that's a great point.
Yeah.
So this really is more so we don't have to, like this, we're deciding this now, so we don't have to meet. Hopefully we don't have to, hopefully things settle down, but so that we don't have to meet about this again.
Yeah.
In July of next year.
Correct.
We're getting our work done now,
Yeah.
essentially is what I got you.
And we can go ahead and communicate it out so people just know if we have to make a change, this is what our recommendation would be.
Got it.
So are you all okay with the variable drafts that I've shared, and then with the adjusted fall breaks depending on whichever calendar that the board approves? Okay. Any other topics, any other comments, anything else? The board is meeting Monday, as I said. I will be there in person as a representative of the committee, and I'll kind of go over the things that we've talked about as a group. Typically I would invite you guys to the meeting as well. Obviously we can't do that this year in person, but they are streamed. If you wanted to view them, you can. But they will talk about it Monday. They won't vote. I'll present everything Monday. They'll have a week to kind of digest it all, and then they will come back the following Monday and vote. And so then the next day on Tuesday, I'll send out an email to all of our schools, to all of our stakeholders, kind of letting them know this is the calendar for next year, so people can start making plans. But so they'll talk about it Monday, and they'll vote on it the following Monday. Any other comments, concerns, questions?
Just thank you, Garrett, for doing all the research and contacting all the other districts, because that really does mean a lot to people to be able to have breaks with their families and everything. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks for suggesting that. I'm glad that was a good idea. Yeah.
I agree with Allison. Thank you very much for all the work that you put into it.
Well, I appreciate your all's thoughts too. Well, if there's no other items, are there any? I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Got a motion.
Warren?
Motion to adjourn from Sherry. Is there a second?
I second.
Derby seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thanks, guys. Appreciate all your input.
Thank you.
All right. See ya.